Okay, I'm back inside. I just brought the parts in. I'm going to let them cure for 10-15 minutes or so. In this case, this time I sprayed over the black base from Alclad, which I believe is enamel. I'm not 100% sure. It's a very thin black gloss base. Now that's one thing that I do, no matter what metallic I'm painting, what color, just out of habit, I always spray the part first with a thin enamel black. Metalizing colors actually bite into that enamel. I mean, I know that lacquers will bite into plastic. They're notorious for actually interacting with the base, so that may have something to do with why I have pretty decent results, because I always, regardless of the color, even if it's not chrome or a highly polished color, just out of habit, I always spray a gloss black base. It brings out the imperfections. I can see what I'm going to end up with when I spray the metallic color on top, and I believe it really does help that color to bite and hold on. I sprayed it when it didn't seem completely cured, although it was dry to the touch. You still had that, that stickiness, but not to where it was affecting, leaving fingerprints or touching the paint. But that's when I like to spray the metallic, because I feel like it really bites on there good and holds good. And that may be a difference that some people have from what I do. Some people may just spray it direct onto plastic or whatever, and maybe it doesn't grip as well. So I just wanted to mention that. Another thing is that I've never sprayed like a very large, like say a whole airplane model with the metalizers. With a lot of handling, you would see results from handling too much, and the Alclads are much, from what I understand, they're much more resilient to that. Because I have masked these colors. I use a low-tack masking tape, and I've used the wet newspaper strips as well. When I'm able to do that, I use that. But I use low-tack tape on these, and I've not had a problem with it lifting the paint. I have played around with heavier tack masking tape and have pulled a little bit off, but that was on some buffing colors, and it buffed right back out. But so yeah, it is important to use a low tack and use as little of it as possible. Typically what I use it for is little engine parts and things like that, so I'm not doing a lot of masking on them anyway. 15 minutes or so. I've let the parts kind of cure up a little. I've got me a piece of pantyhose, and just start out light, just lightly rubbing. Lightly rubbing. Doesn't take much. I don't know if you can see that. It's already bringing out the sheen. And I'm not getting every little crack and crevice. I kind of like that because it shows a little more definition that way. And you can buff, I found you can buff these paints fairly vigorously before rubbing through. Just don't go real crazy and build up a lot of heat, and just don't go crazy with it, but just give it a little buff. Maybe as you are handling the part, from this point on, when I start gluing it on the motor and doing some other things and painting and holding it and all that, I'll come back later on after all that and the motor's pretty well done in this case, and I'll give it just another little light buff to take out any little, just from handling marks, if there might have been a little grease on your fingers, and it kind of buffs right out if there is any marks. I haven't had any problems really with it leaving marks all in it, or it flaking off, or leaving dust on my hands or anything. But that's it. I mean, that's the aluminum buffing plate, and as you can see, that's a pretty sweet little finish. And let me just, to prove a point, I'm going to smash my thumb into this shiny part. I don't see any fingerprints, and I don't see anything coming off on my thumb. So yeah, this stuff is pretty good. It's just a matter of just following a few little steps. Here, let me take this off. This has been not quite 15 minutes, about 10 to 15 minutes since I've painted, and can already handle the parts quite vigorously. Just polishing and on, and the more you polish, just keep it light. Try not to burn, really keep going and going and going in one spot. After all, it is a very thin coat. You could burn through it just like you could burn through any thin coat of paint. So, but you can start seeing some of the sheen come out. But anyway, that's just a quickie metalizer the way I do it. Well, here's one that I did. I painted this whole engine and transmission with the steel buffing metalizer, and that was over a primer coat, a gray primer. After the primer was good and dry, I took some pantyhose and I actually polished up the primer, mainly around the transmission area. But I kind of polished up that primer and gave it sort of a sheen. Sprayed my steel, buffed on it a little bit, masked it off with low-tack tape, and sprayed the engine in the orange. And then I came back and just buffed on it a little more, and it really brought out the highlights and gave it just sort of a, you know, that multi-sheened look. Looks great, and that's over gray primer. It was an experiment I did, and it worked out pretty good. The key is just having a good, smooth, polished surface. It works best on that if you're trying to get a shine. I never thin the metalizers. I have never had a need to thin it. If you go thinning it, then you're just screwing up the system, in my opinion. Then you might have problems with it coming off and showing fingerprints and not curing right, not buffing right. If you're having to thin these metalizers as thin as they are already, you're using the wrong equipment. You've got way too fine of a needle in your airbrush. If it's that fine, you have to thin the metalizers. Don't thin them. Use the right needle. If your airbrush comes with several different needles, or it uses several different needles, buy those needles and use them. Don't try to use the same needle and same fine, super fine airbrush for every different type of medium. That, I think, might be a big problem that people are encountering. No need to thin this stuff. I'm spraying it through a Paasche H with a number 3, and it still comes out in a very fine light coat. 10 minutes, don't overbuff it. Like I said, I have never had a problem with it being a powdery finish coming off. I've never had a problem with it leaving a bunch of fingerprints every time I touch it. And I'm not really doing anything further than following the instructions on the website. And I spray it all in one coat. I just spray it lightly until I get a solid coverage. And then I stop. And that's it. Hopefully this is helpful to some people. Some people that are thinking about trying some metalizers. I would highly recommend the Paasche number 3, and using it the way I do, you'll save a lot of paint. And anyway, hopefully that's helpful. Any questions, comments, please post them or let me know.